So Christian movies have a reputation for being terrible. And honestly, it's well earned. Most Christian movies are terribly written. They feel more like a sermon than they do a story. Poorly acted, just very poorly written. Terrible writing just ruins a lot of these films. And I think this is awful because, I mean, it bears bad witness to the world because what are we saying as Christians that we can't even make movies, comparable to the world? We just make awful movies and we just accept them because they're Christian. And I think this is, terrible. But there are actually some good Christian movies out there, and I thought I would share some of the more out of the way ones with you. So I'm not including two different types of films on this list that I know are good. Films that are good that I've seen, Christian films I've seen that are good, but are just more well known. Most people know about them. Also, I'm not including ones that I've heard that are good, but I haven't seen. So it's like I don't think I can fairly recommend it if I haven't seen it for myself. So I might even make a part 2 to this video eventually. As I watch more movies, I might find a few more I might want to recommend. So I will put all these films inside the description below if you want to look them up. The name and the year they were released will be there. So if you want to watch these movies for yourself, just type in that stuff. So without any further ado, and I like these films, though some of them, there are some stuff I disagree with, some of the stuff on the more bottom tier stuff, but these are some decent films, I think, and I hope you will be able to enjoy them. So the first film, and this is the only one you can't find on YouTube, it's on Netflix, but the rest of these are on YouTube and you can find them for free. This film is Come Sunday. Now this film is actually about the Pentecostal Bishop Carlton Pearson, who ended up becoming a Universalist. And the reason it's so much on the bottom tier is mostly because Pearson, though he started off in the right direction, eventually ended up embracing some even downright heretical ideas. He became a Unitarian Universalist with somewhat of a Christian bent, and there's definitely a lot of things that he taught that I just cannot agree with. He definitely was very liberal, but just taught a lot of very New Age ideas, a lot of New Age, New Thought ideas, Pearson. But he started out in the right place, and for what it's worth, this movie is pretty good. It's the story of Pearson becoming, it's a bit dramatized. It's not exactly how it went in real life, but it is, the story of Pearson, starting off as a successful Pentecostal pastor, always trying to save souls and stuff. And then he becomes a Universalist, and it's a pretty good film. It is noticeable that it is not actually made by Christians. It's telling the story of a Christian, but it's not actually made by Christians, so that's kind of noticeable. So it's on the bottom tier for Pearson's theology, but also because it's not actually made by Christians, but it's telling the story of a Christian. There are definitely some things I know some viewers of the channel might not be fond of, primarily language. This is the only film on the list that actually has some language in it. And I know that some of my viewers might not want to see a film with language, and I understand that. And there's some other smaller elements of the film I don't fully agree with, though I still think it's a pretty good film overall. And I definitely think it's very interesting, to see the story of Carlton Pearson brought to life, even if I don't fully agree with the bishop, the direction that Pearson took with his life, theologically. I do think that it is still a really good film, and it actually does, I still think it does a good job at preaching a lot of the points of universal salvation. Unfortunately, Pearson passed away last year, and actually, I can still remember I was on the way to church. I do church hopping, and I was sometimes I put on NPR, though sometimes NPR is it's unlistenable, but sometimes it is listenable. And actually, I managed to hear a story about a Pearson, and it was really interesting to hear the topic of universal salvation brought up on liberal radio. So yeah, even though I don't fully agree with Pearson's direction in life, and there are definitely some parts of the film I don't agree with fully, I do like this film, and I do think it's good to be exposed, be out of your comfort zone a little bit. And I like this film, and I think it's good, that I think it's just amazing that a movie about a guy becoming a Universalist even was made at all. So I definitely recommend this film, even though it's not perfect. The next one is Split Infinity, and this one's very obscure, but I know about this because I used to go to a Christian school, as I said before, and in the 5th grade, my teacher, I don't know, I guess she bought these CDs somewhere, and she would sometimes put on these these movies weren't explicitly Christian, like the name Jesus maybe wasn't mentioned in them, but I mean, they were made by a religious film company, and in this film, there is still a reference to God, and it's very clear that it's God acting in this film. Split Infinity is a story about a girl, her name's AJ, and she's living in 1992. This is a film made in 1992. She's like a little capitalist, really. She has like this whole business going at school, and it's really corny. It's a little ridiculous, like this business and all this stuff she's running. And I didn't like this film the first time I saw it, at least at that point. I did not like this film at all until she went back in time. Because the thing is, she starts off as kind of a jerk and like really greedy and stuff. And And honestly, the film's a little bit ridiculous starting off, and like she's real mean to her grandpa or whatever. But then like she wakes up, she just falls asleep, and she wakes up in like a she wakes up and she's her great her grandfather's sister. I think you would call that her grand aunt, something like that. And she wakes up and she's her, and she's in the year 1929, and she's been sent back there to like stop some stuff from happening because the grandpa will sell their farm, and like he's going to put all the money from the farm on the stock market. And of course, it's 1929, so it's like she knows Black Tuesday is getting ready to happen. And I actually found this to be an enjoyable film. Not to give too much of the plot away, but she starts something called Future World. It's like an amusement park, like at a barn, and that actually, well, it helps out with this whole stock market thing. Not to give too much of the plot away of the film. I enjoyed the film. It is made for children, but like it doesn't treat the viewer like a child. I don't think it's actually fairly enjoyable. And to those of my viewers, of course, I wasn't alive in the '90s, but to those of my viewers that did live through the 1990s, I don't know, maybe you'll find it interesting because I at least thought the opening parts said in 1992 were a little ridiculously 90s. But I like this film. It's a little bit cheesy, but I'm a sucker for a good time travel story, and I found it to overall. I didn't like the first few minutes when she was in the present day, but when she went back to 1929, I felt the film was massively improved, and I felt it was a decent film. And it is, though the name Jesus Christ is never explicitly said in the film, it is very clearly a Christian movie. It's implied that it's God that sends her back in time. I know I probably didn't give a very good plot synopsis, but it is a good movie. I would recommend checking it out. It's free here on YouTube. It's called Split Infinity 1992. Of course, it'll be down in the description below. But I like this film, and I would recommend you check it out. It's a neat little film. I'm a sucker for. If you like time travel movies, you'll like this movie. So the next film, and these are actually really good films, I think they are, but you see, they're a bit different than your normal kind of movies because these two movies, and I put two movies together, you're going to find out why, because they're both silent films, actually. They were both made in the 1920s. The first is The Ten Commandments, 1923, and the second is King of Kings, 1927. A lot of people don't know this, but the classic 1956 Ten Commandments is actually a remake of Cecil DeMille's earlier movie, The Ten Commandments, 1923. And I really like this movie. And actually, a lot of people seem to like it because it has over 1 million views here on YouTube. Once again, it's a movie you can get free as well. I know some people are like, oh, a silent film. But I personally, I love silent film. I've actually had the privilege of actually seeing silent film like played inside a theater that was made inside the silent age. And I've actually been able to hear a guy who actually knows how to play an old school like silent film organ. So I've actually had the privilege of seeing that. The most recent film I got to see was Charlie Chaplin's The Circus because it went public domain this year, and it was hilarious. The whole house was laughing. You know that you're funny if people, 100 years later are still laughing at you. But, Chaplin has some good jags. But I actually like these two films. The Ten Commandments, 1923. Now, a lot of people, now, DeMille, he changed his film very differently in 56 because the 56 version is purely just the biblical story, the Ten Commandments. But what's really interesting about the 1923 version is only about the first 50 minutes of the movie are the story of Moses. And like, it's really interesting. Like, it starts at the 10th plague. So like, you don't get any of the earlier stuff. It starts at the 10th plague, and then the Israelites, it starts with them let go. And it's only the first 50 minutes of the film, and that ends with Moses getting the 10 Commandments and the golden calf. With the golden calf looks a little ridiculous in this film. But I really like the effects. I love old school effects, even though they're a bit more corny. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I prefer the CG and stuff, but it's like, I prefer to see effects because I just have more respect for people who actually did like effects. And I love the thing about how did they do it. But even I just love 1920s like effects. I don't know. I think it looks really cool. But this was a really big film back in 1923. It was like the second highest grossing film of the year. And then there's actually another half of the film. Most of the film is actually set in the modern day. Well, 1923 modern day, and it's a story about two brothers, Danny and Tommy. And Danny, no, is it Tom? It's Tommy. Okay, I might have got these two mixed up. But one of the brothers, he's like, okay, this is my biggest problem with this film. Like, this is 1923, so a lot of people didn't know atheists or secular people. America was still a mostly Christian and Jewish nation back then. And he becomes an atheist, and he's a Pureflix movies that kind of have a bad reputation portraying atheists as just being terrible people. And he is portrayed cartoonishly bad at some points. But I really like this movie still. It's just an enjoyable plot. And there's also like romance involved, and I'm giving a horrible plot synopsis of the current day thing. Um, but it's okay. So pretty much, what is it? Tommy, I believe it is. He becomes a businessman, and he meets this girl that the other Danny has a crush on. He's like, I want to get with her, and then they get together. They get married, and that kind of creates some tension there. But Danny, Tommy becomes like this slick businessman, and really the film comes together a few years later when he's building a church, and but the thing is that he's making it with like mostly sand, so the concrete's like really really low quality, and pretty much the church falls in, and the whole message of the film is if you break the Ten Commandments, they'll break you. So he continues to break the Ten Commandments and live a sinful life, and it eventually destroys him. And actually, I really love like the prologue to the beginning of this film. I always really liked it. It's like I believe it's written by Amy Semple McPherson, a famous Pentecostal preacher she was back in the 20s, and like it was a prologue in the beginning of the film, and it's like before the World War, the world laughed at the Ten Commandments, and it was outdated, and then like now after the World War, there's only one World War at this point, the Great War. The world is crying and looking for a way out, and the Ten Commandments, the true answer, written on stone 3,000 years ago. I actually really like that little prologue. I thought it was very beautiful, and though the film it's a little bit corny, especially with the portrayal of an atheist, I think that's very corny and ridiculous how it portrays atheists. But I enjoyed this film a lot. It definitely, when it comes to the modern plot, and I know I'm doing an awful job describing it, it really is a hit or miss. Some people love it, other people hate it, but a lot of people seem to like this film, myself included. And it's just the copy here on YouTube. I think the organ's great. I love organs. I think the organ's the best instrument. It's the most beautiful. And I think the sound effects in the organ in this film is really good. It's really well preserved. In fact, when it comes to the set with like the Egyptian scene, Cecil DeMille, he actually built like this giant set of Egypt, and then they dumped it all into the ocean. And still today, like stuff like Egyptian stuff will still wash up on the shore over there in California. Even though it's been 100 years, pieces of this set will still wash up on the shore. Little Egyptian trinkets. It's this giant set. It's and for the time, the effects are really good. There's a lot of really good effects in this film. Great sets and decent editing. I think it's really well done. There's a little bit of comedy in the film. I enjoy it. I just like this film a lot. Definitely when it comes to the modern half, I do recommend you at least watch the original, like the first 50 minutes about Moses and them. But when it comes to the modern half of the film, it's really hit or miss. Now, I love the modern portion of this film, but some people don't like it. The other film I mentioned, it's the reason I threw it in is because it's made by the same guy, Cecil DeMille, and it's 1927. And there are a few silent films out there made in the silent age about Jesus, but this is definitely the best because it's the most complete version of Jesus' life. It's also the one with the best budget. I really like this film. I think it's well made, well acted. Definitely some really good sets and effects. I think it's really well made. It's a really good film, and like this is actually a bit of later. Okay, so silent films, it was a transitional period, and actually it starts in 25 when they start adding in sound effects in the movie. So this film actually has some sound effects within it, but no vocals. It's a really good film. I really like it. King of Kings, 1927. It's a really good, because there's so many films about Jesus out there, but there's only a few silent films about Jesus. And silent films are a very different medium than talkies, and I really enjoy this film. I think it's really well done. It's just a life of Jesus, and the really cool thing about both of these films, especially in this film, it's mostly just scripture. Like most of the title cards, it's just scripture because like these older Bible films, and I've seen older silent films about Jesus' life, they could just quote straight scripture in the title cards. So a lot of these old Christian films, they just have a bunch of scripture in them, just straight King James Bible scripture put on the the title card. And I actually really enjoy that little thing about the film. But I really like King of Kings, 1927. Really good effects for the time, and I still think most of them hold up okay today. Well acted, I think. Just well done. I think it's just a good film about Jesus. And There's so many films about Jesus out there, but there's only three silent films about Jesus, I think, and this is the most complete. The other ones are not complete tellings of his life, but this is a complete telling. Well, I mean, of his ministry. It does not include his birth or his. It does not include his birth. It doesn't include his early life, but it does include most of his ministry. And I like this film. So it's a good film. I would recommend it. So going beyond that, the next film I'd recommend is a film called Sheffey, Sheffey 1977. And this film is about the Methodist circuit rider Robert Sheffey. I actually heard about this film once again at my old school, and this time it was from my art teacher in middle school. And he told me about this film because he went to Bob Jones, and this was a Bob Jones made film. And I would like to get something out of the way. Bob Jones at this time was really, really racist. I don't know how else. I felt bad if I didn't mention it because, I mean, like the federal government had to make them desegregate their college in 1971 or force them to get their tax exemption. And they actually wouldn't allow interracial dating until the year 2000. So, it's just, I don't think I could really get around that. But this film is made by Bob Jones. But it is actually a really good film. It's about the life of Robert Sheffey. For some reason, they don't mention that he was a Methodist in this film, but I thought it was well acted, fairly well written. There was a little bit, the writing could sometimes be a little bit corny. And you can tell there were a few times when the writers were like, they were putting words in the Sheffey's mouth, like they were talking about things that were happening, well, in 1977. But I mean, for that point today, but it's overall a really good film. Robert Sheffey is actually called the American St. Francis because he was like a man in the wilderness. He mostly preached in the mountains of Virginia, and he was a circuit rider, and he went around and preached the gospel, and he converted a lot of people, and he did a lot of good. And he's well known up there in the Appalachian Mountains around Virginia. He's still well known today. He had that much of an impact, that much of a ministry. And overall, I found this story to be really enjoyable. It was decently acted, decent sets. I enjoyed this film a lot. I'm not doing it justice, but it is actually a really good film. It's well acted, it's well written. You see, the thing is, I think the best Christian films most of the time are are biographical films. Based off people's lives, whether it be Bible characters or Christian saints and stuff. And that's because when it comes to truly great people, you already have a story there. You already have a great story there. And as long as you don't make all the dialogue ridiculous and you act it okay, you can make a good film if you've got a good story. And I think most of the best Christian movies are people's lives because they already have a good story to tell. It's called Sheffey, 1977. Just look it up. I know I probably didn't give the best synopsis here, but, he's a lost soul beginning in 1839. And he converts to Christianity. There actually is a little bit of character development in this film. That's actually something I appreciate with this film. He's not just perfect starting off. He has pride, and this film, one of the reoccurring things in this film is that Sheffey has pride and he has ego, and it has to be broken, and that happens throughout the film. And I think that's very beautiful. I appreciate that the Christian character is not perfect because so many Christian movies they fall victim of this. They make these perfect people, but with this film, I mean, it is just a minor thing, but he does have pride, he does have ego, he struggles with forgiveness, and he does have to move past that, and I really appreciate that in a film, and I found it to be entertaining. It's mostly just different stories in Sheffey's life, and it cuts ahead. Sheffey's really stubborn, in his older years, and it's his wife wants him to give up circuit riding because he's getting old. And, being a guy riding around the mountains all the time, he could, get hurt. And, being old, he could die. And his wife, in the film at least, so there's a camp meeting. This is a reoccurring thing. The film also is very much reflected on the times because towards the end of the film, this is the late 19th century, early 20th century. He dies in 1902. And we're starting to see the beginnings of liberalism in the church. And this is actually a theme in the film. The church wants to stop the camp meetings, which are these revivals, people would have yearly revivals and stuff. And the church wants to stop down the camp meetings. And eventually, I don't want to give too much away, but a young fellow will burn down one of the camp meetings. And then, Sheffey, he's running to go see the camp meeting burn over the hill. And Eliza's no, Sheffey, you're going to get hurt. And then she actually dies running after him. And, it's actually a really beautiful film. I really enjoy it. I'm not giving enough justice, but I love circuit riders, Methodist circuit riders. I mean, the reason why I have so many Methodist churches in America is because of the circuit riders. They built Methodism in America. And talking from universalism as well, the Universalist Church was built by the Universalist circuit riders. Circuit riders are a very important part of American religious history, and they must have been swept under the rug. And I think this film does a decent job at showing the life of a circuit rider and showing what circuit riders did. And I really like this film. It's called Sheffey, 1977. I really recommend. It's a really good film. And then the last film I'm going to recommend, and it's kind of funny because I started off with a story of a preacher ending his career because he taught differently about hell. And this film is called Hell and Mr. Fudge. Hell and Mr. Fudge is actually not about a guy becoming a universalist. It's about a guy becoming an annihilationist, but I still really enjoy this movie. In fact, I like it better than Come Sunday. It's called Hell and Mr. Fudge. It's about the story of Edward Fudge. He's one of the more famous annihilationists. He wrote a book called The Fire That Consumes, and he's an influential annihilationist figure. And this is his story of how he became an annihilationist, and how he meets his wife. And I think it's decently written. And how he loses his preaching job, and all these different things. And I think it's a really good film. It's free here on YouTube, and it's pretty well written. I think all the characters are likable. Also, if you want to know more about annihilationism, this is a really good film to go to because they include a lot of arguments for annihilationism in the film. Sheffey also has to stand for, not Sheffey, okay. Fudge has to stand for his principles in the film multiple times. Like, he's continuously persecuted by this one Baptist guy he knows, and he's persecuted about it. And it's a pretty good film, I think. I think we can all relate to somebody being persecuted for their beliefs on hell. And even though he's an annihilationist, I think he has a really good, in this film, Fudge has a really good understanding of God's grace and God's love, and this is what really drives Fudge in this film. And I just find the guy who plays Fudge to be likable. I think all the characters are very likable. I think it's a really good film and very enjoyable. And there's a lot of neat theological information in this film. I really recommend this film. I think we can all learn something, especially as universalists, to understand what annihilationists believe. This is a really good place to go because it's not just some boring YouTube video about annihilationism. It's actually like an engaging film about annihilationism and a guy coming to believe in annihilationism. And I found it to be a very enjoyable film. So I would recommend Hell and Mr. Fudge. And of course, all these will be inside the description below. So I hope you enjoyed these films. And of course, I might make a part 2 eventually when I build up another list. So if you have any films that you think are good Christian films that are not well known, put them down in the comments below if you want. And God bless. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and Christ will conquer.